Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Sid City Social Club for Friday, June 18th. And we are excited that today we have with us Nour Wazzi, who is a writer and director. She wrote and directed the short film Baby Mine. And with that, I'm going to welcome our special guest, Nour.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. But yeah, I guess we'll talk afterwards, but, enjoy. I hope you guys enjoy Baby Mine. And thanks for being Sid fans.
Yay. So that's Baby Mine that came out in June of last year. And it's a little bit twisty, subverting expectations. I'm going to start things off with kind of a broad question for Nour. What was your inspiration for this story?
Actually, it started, it was with two true stories. One, my co-writer at the time was Iranian. Her father he was Iranian. He had kidnapped her and her sister, and they were on the run. But we wanted to do we didn't want to play the stereotypical story of the Middle Eastern guy who is actually, the baddie. And then the other, at the same time, when we were thinking about that true life story, I had met somebody who had been through Munchausen by proxy, and their mother had been doing this to them. So I decided to kind of merge the storylines and use it as an opportunity to try and subvert, some representation and try and tell an edge of seat thriller through the process.
I was going to say, I was on the edge of my seat. We here in Sid Fan Club, we have the added element of expecting him to die in all of his projects. So I was waiting for that to happen. But you left us with a pretty open-ended, we don't have a conclusion if things didn't wrap up. A question that somebody had that they wanted me to ask is, does Eddie know at the end? She looks at the camera like she's aware that something else is going on. How much, in your opinion, how much does she know?
I sort of want to leave that. The whole point of that last shot is for you guys to kind of make that interpretation yourselves. But she was watching, so in my mind, she's aware.
She overheard them talking.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, when you I read a few books about Munchausen. Actually, when we did that film, when we wrote that film, we actually started writing it in 2013. And none of those, there's been a series, loads of Munchausen stories come out since then, from The Act, Sharp Objects. There was a film as well. I can't remember what it was called, but that's, so it was surprising that suddenly I had never heard of it, and then suddenly all these stories were coming out. But in all the research I'd done, I'd found that a lot of the time the kids are aware of what their parents are doing, but they're kind of I don't know, I guess it kind of becomes this kind of toxic behavior in order to please their mothers. And make and feel and because they need to feel needed. So it just becomes this kind of in the same cycle of domestic violence that you'd have. It kind of ends up going down that road.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to say it, that it's a cycle of domestic violence, because in all of your reading, is there a pattern of somebody who was a victim of Munchausen by proxy who then inflicts it on someone else? Because that's kind of what you see in movies and TV shows, is that they go on and perpetuate the cycle. But I don't know if that's accurate or not.
There was a book that was one of the starting points when we were researching into this, where it was this woman who had gone through it, had written about it, and I think her grandmother had abused her mother, but it wasn't necessarily Munchausen. I think I can't remember. I believe it was a different form of abuse, and then the mom I think it's just that it's that need to feel purpose. And I think if you've been broken down by your family, I think you start, I think that cycle repeats because of what it leaves you with. And this feeling of feeling like you're nothing and have no value. And I feel and so sometimes perpetuating feeling being a mother that can actually feel needed and feel that she's got purpose in life.
It's almost swinging to the exact opposite, the opposite end of the spectrum, where you had a mother who was negligent or abusive in a violent way, and this is I'm caring for you. I care for you so much. That's the rationalization, right? We're going to go over to Amy, who has a question.
When you set out to write it, did you start with the idea of like, I want to write a Muslim or Arabic man as the hero, and the idea for the audience subversion came later? Or did you always intend for it to be like a slow reveal and kind of let people make their assumptions based on their own biases and like surprise them with the twist? Like, did you want to do did the twist come first, or did the...
Oh yeah, I mean, I always, all my stuff tried to, I'm all about subversion. Like I like the idea of you see things, you question your own assumptions and judgments. So I always knew that I would, I mean, actually this project, like prior to, like my co-writer had initially was going to do her own like personal story. And then when I came onto it, like initially it was the mom story. And I decided well, through the development, we decided actually we wanted to play it as a dual narrative, but I always knew that I wanted to, that the Middle Eastern guy had to be the hero by the end. You have to it was a hard one. The whole flashback thing is interesting. I'd be curious to see how people thought of that, because I watch it now after all these years. And it's a tough one, that kind of like unreliable narrator and all that. But like the whole idea was to try and, it's so hard in a short film to be able to kind of do that, pull the wool over your eyes and kind of make you see something a certain way. But it's just, it's always tricky, because I didn't want to put Siddig in those situations of, domestic violence. And even if it wasn't true, it was from like an unreliable narrator. But I don't know, like I'm curious what everyone thought of those flashbacks.
Yeah, just like the choice to make the reveal like a flashback. So, like, it'd be one thing if like you were in the dark and the audience knew all along, but it was like the audience didn't know all along, and so it was like the like two sides. Like we didn't know and he didn't know, but then we found out, but he never found out. So, I also watched Lab Rats, and I liked the subversion in that as well. Of like, which one's the android? It's not who you think. Oh, yeah, I like that in that your other short as well, which I watched. So.
Oh, thanks.
All right, Karen.
There is this one scene where she was asking, like, "Don't you care about us?" And Sid has this smirk, and so I watched it the first time this morning, and I was confused about, did he actually smile, or is that just in her recollection of the story?
Yeah, because I mean, the idea of the flashbacks at the time was that the ones that are told from her through her voice, and which are visualized, are her, unreliable perspective of what's happened.
Yeah, so that never happened.
So it never happened. Yeah, exactly. But when you see it from his perspective later, you see how the events really played out. Yeah. So I mean, that was the idea. It's a tough one now, because I feel like it's always hard as a director, because you always kind of look at something after you make it and you're like, I don't know, like a second time around, I probably wouldn't have gone as far. Because I went two extremes. I went like, completely to the one side on hers and completely to the other on his. And I think I would have found a bit more of a middle point and just told it from a slightly skewed perspective. So it's out of context, rather than it being, I mean, this is all hindsight for me. Just, I shot this film, like in 2000, even though it's came out last year, I shot it in 2015. So, a lot of time and experience has kind of passed. So I always look at those flashbacks and I always think, oh, I'm not 100% sure if that was the best way to do that. But, like, I think that's just the curse of being a filmmaker. You're always kind of, analyzing your own content. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys are filmmakers, but no.
Not at all, but I really, really liked it. And I have not a question, more a comment. I watched it, and then I was like scrolling through the YouTube comments, and I was like, okay, there were a lot of comments like, yeah, of course you always assume the Arab man is like the bad guy, and I was kind of, well, no, but of course it may have to do that because it was Sid. So I was like, no, please let him be the bad guy. I think maybe this audience here has a tiny bit of a bias.
It's true. Although I've been watching the comments, some people were like, "Oh, I hope he's not the baddie."
Almost as bad as dying.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it is amazing, because I am doing like a feature that was initially based on this, but I've gone a different direction with it, and it is always hard because you kind of, yes, there are a lot of biases, and figuring out the best ways to play on those stereotypes and those biases is without kind of, I guess, being inauthentic is always the biggest challenge. But it is. I mean, people assume it. Sometimes you don't even need to do anything. People just assume it just because that's that's just what we're used to seeing. I mean, I'm Lebanese originally, so so like one of the reasons I wanted Sid was because he was one of the first Middle Easterns I'd ever seen on screen, like growing up, and I loved him from like an early age. So when I knew one of my actresses had worked with him, I was like, hook me up. And he was great, and he was really cool. And cooked me dinner, and we had good chats. He's great. He's a really, really cool guy. He's got a good fan base. I hope
Thank you for making that film. It was amazing.
I'm glad you liked it.
Okay, Geneva.
First off, thank you for making a film that hurts in a lot of different ways. The question that I had, I watched it when it came out last June, and Mel was like, Sid's in the Thing, and I'm like, I will watch The Thing. And watching it again just now and knowing the ending, and so being able to look for all the cues, I'm curious how, when you were putting the film together, because it is so short, you had to tell the actors where the twist is going to happen, for one thing, but how they and you handled being able to be almost two characters, both the mom and Sid, at all points, and not giving either one away, and being able to do these terrible things but also being able to do these really nice things, and like how the dynamic worked on set of receiving this story of duplicity.
I mean, ironically, the hardest parts weren't the extreme, the opposition of flashbacks. It was the bits in between. It was the bits that lead you to question this guy's intentions, because that surprisingly was to do it, to play in a way where he's treading that line, and you don't know, like, you don't know what he's gonna do, but like not. Because the line is so thin of like really painting him as a baddie, because he's not. He's just a father's concern for his kid, So that was actually harder than having to flip between two different, because that's you just simple direction. And Siddig is a he's a veteran. The guy he'll throw direct. He throws performances in his sleep. So he just giving me what, like, I don't have to ask with Sid. He just did whatever. He just throw different ideas out, and he tried different like extremes, and he just loved it. He's playing around, but like the middle point was always the one to kind of finesse. Hope that answered your question.
It did, and I'm curious also, because child actors are such an interesting part of humanity. I'm curious how it worked with you trying to explain the dynamics of what was happening without explaining the dynamics, or however much you did explain that, to the actress whose name I'm blanking on at the moment, sorry, that here you are doing so much acting that is just sort of standing there looking scared, but you are the central figure, who has to be ambiguous even at this age.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, she was just super talented, and she actually had done like a couple of TV, and she's young, but she's actually done a couple of TV shows before this. Like, I think she did like Marcella or and something. Was it? I can't remember the other one, but she was just, I mean, gold, really. I mean, I did audition 100 kids to get her, to be fair, but so I think she just took direction so well. You just kind of just tell her, it's all about just seeing everything in the micro. So it's just scene by scene, you just, and she's more like, a lot of the time, she's just more focused on her own, on what she's going through in that moment, like, with her father, it's more concern for her mom when she's kind of going through, what's it called? When she's kind of in the progress of kind of getting dizzy and getting ill. It's all about what she's feeling, and it's mainly just with her when she's in the car with Sid. It's just find that balance again with her. But she was a master. She was great. Like, it was a lot easier than I thought with her. So I mean, I was lucky. She did all the work.
Can I ask one more question, Mel, and then I'll shut up?
Go ahead.
Okay. I always have a million questions about things. So the creation of the character Mike, who is such an everyman in such terrible ways, in creating, casting, working through his lens, which we don't get his mindset, we only get his words. How did you or did you mindfully stop yourself from making just a caricature of, hey, here's racist, sexist dude, who comes up to that line but doesn't quite cross it, because then it would have unbalanced the intensity of the main characters, which you struck that balance beautifully of these are all three very real people. But how did Mike become somebody who wasn't just like, ugh, just kick that guy out of the truck?
No, that's a good question. I mean, he was actually the hardest character, believe it or not. I think it was with him. Yeah, I mean, we try to kind of reserve anything too sweeping in dialogue and kind of just really play it with more subtextual references, like, you know, is he an Arab? You know, men like that. I mean, it was just trying to use the lines in as concise and just nuanced as possible, so he's not just being direct about anything. And if you notice, like when he does kind of have, you know, the altercation with Sid, like he doesn't say anything to him. You know, and I think if you go further with, and that's the difference with some Hollywood stuff, is if the minute they start, you know, throwing cheesy lines out, you know, you've lost the audience. So I think we just try to really just keep things as small as possible with him, and just let the mom do the work, you know, in terms of like steering his judgment of this character. But when I played it when I kind of like, I gave him a whole backstory, and I made him, we really talked through his character, even though it's it's not his story at the end of the day. But we did have a whole, like, even the moment why he chooses not to pull the trigger, like we developed a whole reasoning behind all of that for him to kind of play that as truthfully as possible. But these are all kind of things just between me and the actors. But at least it seems that it's come through and you felt like he was rounded, which is a very hard thing to do when you're when it's the supporting character and they're not actually, their story is not that important, you know. But I'm glad you felt like the balance worked. So, you know, cheers.
Thanks, Shinabeth. Yeah, I think his character was really crucial as initially he was the stand-in for the audience. And I think as we experience his perspective more and more, it makes us uncomfortable because, as somebody mentioned in the chat, he's your everyday racist, not your over-the-top racist. And so all of a sudden, as you see that he's making these incorrect assumptions and making these comments, and initially maybe you related to him, that's food for thought, you know.
That's good. I'm very proud of it. I mean, to be honest, we needed a red herring. You always need a red herring in the stories, because otherwise you would have suspected the mom immediately. So, you know, but that's interesting that you see it like he's kind of the kind of the audience, the perspective of the audience in a way, you know.
Yeah, because he's the one who's just been observing creepily from his window while drinking.
You know, I probably, to be honest, looking back, I probably would have cut that, but that, you know, I should just. Oh,
I don't know. I mean, it just adds an element of the creepy. You know, it's just.
Yeah, no, it does. But I just think it's that extra thing of like, it just adds an extra question that I didn't quite answer. But
I think that's okay.
In my mind, he's this obsessive. He's supposed to be this kind of. He's been watching this, you know, this woman. So like, we wanted to play. There needed to be. We felt like we needed that extra motivation from this character, you know, outside of potential racism.
Oh, for sure, because I mean, you didn't set him up as, you know, like a bounty hunter or, you know, a cop or something like that. So he has to have a reason to be helping this woman.
Yeah,
I mean,
before you realize, like veteran, so that was kind of the
and before you realize the twist, there's this feeling of dread because now she's gotten herself mixed up with this guy. Who's creepy, and you know, you're still thinking that she's the one who's actually in danger here.
Yeah, no, good. I'm glad that worked out.
I think it works on a lot of levels. Yeah. We're gonna go to Casey.
I more just wanted to gush about how much I liked it, and how I wish that we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, because I really want to share it with all of my friends in my social work classes, and because it's like exactly what we talk about in class, about how, you know, you can come into a situation and you're hearing what someone's saying, but there's sometimes quite a lot more going on, to not make snap judgments about what's going on.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you. That means a lot.
Okay, Zoe, speaking of, do we have any filmmakers here?
Hi, you mentioned earlier that that you were in the process of turning it into a feature. I just want to know, was that something that you had in mind from the beginning of the process of making the short film, or is it something that that you kind of revisited?
No, I mean, I always had it in my head that I wanted to do a feature, but we wanted, but I, as a director at the time, I hadn't done something with decent production value that was a thriller. A lot of my stuff were a bit more kind of drama based. And I wanted something, I needed to do something to showcase my ability. So we started with the short. I mean, actually, not too much. I'm thinking about it. I think I probably, as I was writing it, I was like, you know what, this needs to be a bigger film. We wrote the short was its own thing, and then after I did it, I was like, you know what, actually, I want to do a bigger story. But I decided to go a completely different direction with it. So it's nothing to do with Munchausen or anything like that. It kind of it goes a bit more in the direction of like Gone Girl the Night Of type vibe, but it kind of feeds off experiences with my family. So and it's an Arab American now. It's set in the U.S. So you know.
Are you attracted to making like short films, or is it usually just like to find like ideas to expand on?
I mean, shorts are always a means to an end. It was also a way to kind of hone my skills. Now I think I've shot something like 10 shorts of varying budgets, and I got my break on a sci-fi TV show, Netflix show last year. So I'm not planning to do any more shorts, thankfully. It's a lot of work, you know, like actually this like Baby Mine took, from the point we started writing it to the point we made it took 4 years, you know, because we went out, like we were out to like A-list actors for the mom, and it just took like, and there were a lot of interest, but then the schedule moved, and then and Sid was always the core for me. I was like, I'll Sid, I'm not changing anything. Like Sid is a priority. So if the women can't make it, I have to. But the shoot moved like 4 times, and it was one of those films that you're just like, I literally got the Rachel a week before the shoot, but it's hard work, you know, and I'd rather put that in a feature, that's something that's gonna go global, you know.
Yeah, I love the cinematography and the coloring of the film. I thought it was just absolutely beautiful and contributed so much to the already amazing story. Would you be wanting the same actors for the full length that you're doing?
That's a good question. I mean, at the minute, we're looking at no different, because it's American as well, and I've kind of gone a bit of a different direction with the Arab American. So like he's a bit more volatile, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, you never know. Sid is still on my list, so you never know.
There were several questions in the chat when you mentioned that you got your big break on a sci-fi show for Netflix. I know what that is, but are you allowed to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's called The Last Bus. It'll be out next year. It's a lot of VFX. It's kind of it's like a sci-fi adventure show.
Jen.
I just have a quick question, because when you were talking about the unreliable narrator, it was from the point of view of the father and then the point of view of the mother. But in a feature-length film, would you still consider the point of view of the child as unreliable as a narrator, or would that be the most truth?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that, because actually the child's perspective takes a bigger role in the feature. The way everything's found out is through the kid. So yeah, I mean, that is the most truthful perspective, definitely. It's just in a short, you know, and we were playing 2 sides of the coin with the mom and the husband. That felt like the focus that we needed to put on for the short film, because you have such a small space of time, and the moment you're allowing to question the daughter is right at the end. You know, you're actually, that's when you have to decide, you know, that's when you're propelled into her shoes. The way, I guess the way we wanted to play it was that the father's perspective is the actual true perspective, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be skewed. That's just the nature of memory. But yeah, no, it's interesting you kind of flagged that with the daughter. What do you think, the daughter's perspective, how different would it have been?
That's a tough one. It depends on how you play it. If you didn't show either of the father or the mother flashbacks, and it was just shown from the point of view of the child, you don't have an unreliable narrator. It's just one narrator telling the story. But if you have two unreliables and then the full truth, I'm not sure. Is the child's the full truth? Because at the end of the day, the child's the victim.
That's true. But what is the truth? I mean, I think everything's subjective at the end of the day. But it's funny because actually that memory has always been something that's fascinated me. And I do have a TV show that does exactly that. That's called Perspective, ironically. It's like a body swapping show, but and that one does exactly that. It kind of shows the mom's perspective, the husband's perspective, the kid's perspective, and you kind of and among other characters surrounding a crime. And it's interesting to play that way because then you're really playing, you're really seeing the fallibility of memory, and you have to make the judgment of what is true.
Interesting. Nour, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in filmmaking and what is it that you're trying to say?
I mean, it's been about 15 years that I've been working in the industry, climbing through different roles while I built my my portfolio as a director and a writer. I think kind of what I want to say, I mean, that's something you're constantly shifts from story to story. But I think as a human being, I feel like, I guess someone who is an Arab who's living in London, and I've had I'm a bit more of a transculture kid, like I'm a bit more of a global kid, but I've always been drawn to the perspective of the outsider, of characters that are more kind of flawed. And a lot of my stuff really tries to kind of look at the gray area of humanity and really kind of allow us to question our own assumptions and perspectives, and while trying to touch you in some on a deeper level, transcend some element of the cerebral into something emotional. But I think, I don't know, a lot of my stories kind of do touch upon, there are themes that I find there is a bit of a running theme across a lot of my work, and it kind of connects to, on the one hand, more social issues like prejudice and trauma and identity and belonging. On the other side, like it's more my obsession with kind of questioning our existence. So it kind of touches on like time, memory, family, but I don't know, everything I do really tries to kind of just like really allow us to just question, question the possibilities and put ourselves in the shoes of other people.
Yeah, it sounds like you're exploring empathy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what storytellers, I mean, ultimately that's, if we haven't done our jobs, if you don't feel something at the end of our films, and have been able to kind of identify with people in our stories. So it's really nice actually to hear, especially after all this time. Like, actually, I've not done a Q&A for this film, for this ever. Yeah, so actually it's been great to actually hear everyone's perspective and and get like see what worked, what didn't work. That's nice. Appreciate you.
Yeah, folks here will dig deep. I know there's it's only 20 minutes long, but we've already been talking about it for 40, so there's a lot to discuss.
How engaged you all are. I'm trying to see all these comments. Everyone's like,
yeah. Talk to us a little bit about what you're working on next.
I mean, I've got a slate of projects, so I'm pitching for other people's features and TV shows as well. So I mean, I've kind of steered a bit more into sci-fi. So I've got like a couple of thrillers, but majority of my stuff is science fiction now. And I seem to be pitching on a lot of sci-fi. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm just kind of like, I ended up spending the first lockdown just writing. So I ended up kind of developing about 5 TV shows last year, and then I jumped on Netflix shows. So it's been very productive.
No kidding. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's impressive.
I'm feeling lucky that diverse women are getting more opportunities. But it's getting there. I think it's just patience. They say it takes about 10 years on average from start to completion to actually get a feature out. So but there's a chance it might become a mini series.
Oh.
It'll have a similar style to Baby Mine. So we'll see.
Interesting.
See what happens.
Yeah, it's really cool that there's a lot more opportunities because we have all these streaming platforms now.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting time for people of color generally. I mean, you know, with Black Lives Matter, and now like I feel like there's a bit of a move. There's been like a new campaign from like Riz Ahmed for like Muslim representation. You know, and I feel like the tide is shifting, and perhaps now they're ready to tell, you know, to kind of invest in new perspectives, in more diverse perspectives, and not be focused so much on the financial merit of it. Well, I mean, I like to think that that's what people want to see now. They want to see different faces, and you know, so I mean, I like, well, that's what I mean, I can see it. I feel like from when I made this film to like now, there definitely feels like there's been a shift. So like I feel positive. You know, ironically, it's like Sid is actually one of the few Middle Eastern actors who have actually done roles that aren't just about terrorists, you know. So like, you know, he's luckier than, I mean, that's not been the experience for most most Arab actors.
Yeah.
So like, and I think that's probably what inspired like the next, you know, my generation, you know, that we see like his face in you know, Star Trek, and you know, like it's like, oh, it's nothing to do, like, you know, you just, I mean, it was so cool.
Okay, we're gonna go to Nicole.
I guess some of us were kind of just wondering what it was like working with Sid, and like what he contributed to the film, being in it, and just like his presence, and what was it like for you?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, like from meeting him, like when we first kind of met, we had a long chat over the phone, and we talked about the character and like what I wanted to try and achieve as a, you know, as an Arab woman, and like, you know, the direction I wanted to play with subverting his character and everything. And he was totally on board, and he invited me down for like lunch, and he made like short ribs, and we chatted on his farm, and we chatted for like 5 hours.
Wow.
And we just discussed character, just chat about life, and you know, our own experiences and everything. And then on set, he was just great. I mean, he's just the coolest guy. He's just very chilled. You know, he's you know, he's a master. So he just kind of, he knows, like we chat so much about it. He knew exactly what I wanted, and he just would offer up different things. Like, you know, he, before I'd even say anything, I'd be like, he's like, no, I know what you want. I know you want. I'm like, okay, all right, you do your thing. You know, so he, you know, I felt like I trusted him. I felt, you know, I felt safe, you know, he had good instincts. So he didn't really need much, to be honest. I feel like, because I used to assist and direct a lot, and I always saw the most insecure and inexperienced directors are the ones that felt the need to constantly give direction when it wasn't needed. And if you have a good actor in your hands, you just gotta steer them to just do their thing, you know, because they rock, you know. And he was the same, you know, he was my rock on that set, because the other actors needed more work. So it allowed me to put my energy into the other actors, and just trust that Sid had it, you know, had it down. You know, so it was more nudging, you know, than anything too direct when I was on set, you know. But yeah, it was a pleasure with him, definitely.
So did he still stick to like your script, or?
Yeah. He
Okay.
was great. I mean, he was very like collaborative, and we did rehearsals as well, and it was really fun. I mean, he just really just keen to just play, you know. I think that's what's cool about him. Yeah, he's just humble guy and chilled out, you know, like you're always you never really know what to expect. I've worked with a lot of actors from different calibers and walks of life, and it's surprising which ones are actually have an ego on them, and really disrupt, and aren't their head is not in the right in the right place. But Sid is free of ego, so it was it was a pleasure.
Okay, Geneva is back with more of their millions of questions.
To be fair, this is not originally mine. This is Casey, who's not the Casey who already talked, and brought up a point in the chat that Mike shows up with a gun, and the Americans in the audience are like, oh yeah, that is what you do when you're about to hunt down somebody that you think is dangerous, because it's so normal to us. But then listening to our colleagues from around the world, and especially from the UK, that throws that into a whole new level of, oh no. And so I'm curious if that was something that you started with when you were creating that character, because as you had said, that this was a difficult character to sort of wrap into reality, or if that was, or how it was that you created that aspect of, here is a guy who is a threat, but he's not, but he really is.
the gun thing is actually one of the reasons I've actually moved the feature to the US, because it really helps, even though like it really helps that police have guns, because our police do not carry weapons here. With him, we felt, because we gave him a backstory of being a veteran, we felt, okay, like we needed, because I wanted to try and do things visually and not have to have him say shit all the time, and the gun was just the perfect visual shorthand to help establish the stakes, because we wanted this film to be a life and death thing, without a weapon, unfortunately, like you don't know, you'll just never get to that level of, oh shit, you know exactly what's going to happen, they're going to come together. So it was a necessity for the storytelling, but it is a much bigger deal in the UK, definitely. But I always felt this film would work better in the US as an audience. Like it would just be I don't know, it feels much more commercial as a kind of style as well, and I feel like there's certain things you just buy a bit more in the US than you would in the UK, because it is next level. With like, people don't, it's not, gun culture is not remotely the same. So you made a really good point there.
That was a really good question, because it didn't occur to me until Geneva asked that question, that would have read differently, because I live in middle America and there's a lot of guns around here. So it didn't seem odd to me at all that this guy had one and was taking it with him. Zoe, you've got a follow-up.
Yep, I'm back. You sound like a fountain of ideas, 5 over quarantine and everything. I just want to know, how do you know when you have a good idea and which one that you want to pursue all the way through?
I don't know. It is a good question. I feel like at the end of the day, I'm trying to find things that feel authentic, and that just kind of spark joy in me and make me, the beautiful thing about doing what we do is that you're able to effectively kind of explore facets of life and existence that excite you. So storytelling is kind of like a vehicle for me to open the doors into different people, into different, subject matters and things that I'm fascinated by. So, as long as I feel that constant excitement and it doesn't go, then I'd like to think that I have a good story. I mean, I think as long as at the end of the day, like, people only really it's all about the characters, and it's all about what what they make you feel at the end of the day, and if it's going to be something profound. So as long as the characters, it all feels grounded enough and you feel like you're really connecting with these people. I don't know, I feel like that's kind of what I end up rooting my stories in. I don't know, I think sometimes you just trust your instincts.
Do you have any like trusted people in your life that you show your works to first, or when do you sort of bring the creative process and look for feedback, and what do you do with that feedback?
I mean, to be honest, my trusted person is my husband. He's a writer. He's a bit ahead of the game than I am. Like, he won a BAFTA like 10 years ago, and he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. You'll see, he's flying high. So he's my go-to. So I mean, he hates me for it because I'm always on his back, be like, "You read it?" But yeah, no, I mean, I think in the process of growing as a storyteller, I've learned to just take a step back from feedback and kind of evaluate if it's adhering to the core story that I want to tell. Because I think, early in my career, I feel like I would just take everyone's feedback and be like, all right, let me just implement everything. And I think the more confidence I grew as a storyteller, the more I was able to kind of filter those comments and kind of dig in between the lines of why those comments were being said in the first place. But I think at the end of the day, you just have to, as long as you know what story you want to tell, then you can kind of, I mean, I love collaboration, and I love feedback. I love notes. I just love hearing what people think. I think that's just like the nature of us, is because it's like such an introverted, when you write, you're kind of in your own shell. So to let someone in is always like a really personal thing. But yeah, no, I think it's, through time and experience, I've learned to kind of like figure out like how much of that feedback is valid. I'm part of a few director of color communities, and sometimes I'll run kind of ideas by them. But yeah.
I have one more question. as a writer and a director, when you were getting into filmmaking, did you come at it from as a writer or a director? Was there one that came first that you wanted to do, or was it always film that was really intriguing to you?
And I climbed my way through production, and I actually like started running a company. And while I produced, I would direct my own stuff and not write. And then like about 4 or 5 years ago, I returned to writing again. And I was like, you know what, with the experience of directing, it actually made me a better writer, and I stopped getting a bit like getting so frustrated. So it was a kind of a, you know, weird, because I didn't really know, like for me, when I directed for the first time when I was 20, it's the directing that I love, and that suddenly made me feel alive. I was like, all these moments in between, I felt like I was a zombie, and then I directed like a movie for the first time. I was like, oh shit, like this is what life feels like. So, and then I knew. So directing now comes first.
I want to know, was there a certain moment that you realized that writing was for you? Because it sounds like there was sort of a switch that happened.
Actually, it was this film. Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
I'm so glad I asked. That's amazing.
Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah, well, I hadn't written anything like for like 7 years before I wrote Baby Mine. And actually, it was a credit to my producers at the time, because they were writing it, and then when I asked them like, can I write, you know, like they kind of were very encouraging, and they let me write with them, and then that opened the doors.
When you're writing, like as a director, do you write the visuals as you like? Does the directing part of your brain take over the script, or do you write like the words first?
Because the writing process doesn't start with just a blank page with a script, you know. Like for me, the writing process starts with like a plan, you know. It's a structure, an arc, you know, for a character. So I always kind of start with the writing, with the core kind of storyline, the character progress, you know, like what I want the story to say, how, you know, usually I'll know the ending of something before I've started writing it anyway. So I'm quite methodical. I'm quite like structural. I just see a big picture, and I'll kind of structure something, you know, start with my characters and my story arc. And then once I've kind of got my beats for each act, and my cliffhangers for my, you know, I'm quite intricate with the way I structure. It's not as simple as like, it's kind of like an 8-act structure for most of my features. So then once I start like once I've got those bones, which will kind of develop into the different stages before I get to the actual physical writing, then I'll start visualizing as a director. Mm-hmm. You know, because then you know what, you know, once I've got the meat and the kind of the core of the story down, then when you're starting to be creative, then you're visualizing it as you would see it on camera. So yeah, because I certainly write like a director more so now, actually. Like sometimes I'll mention like, you know, what the camera's doing, or so yeah, I definitely see it.
Yeah, I guess I just know that some like directors who are also their own screenwriters, it's more like a storyboarding kind of, like the visuals are the part that comes first, and they kind of fill in the blanks of the writing. But you're like, no, I have a plot first, and then the visuals come. So.
I mean, it was definitely a learning experience, because I feel like at the end of the day, like the visual can be beautiful, and it could be like, you know, really beautifully written, but if there's no like, you know, if the meat, everything comes with the script, you know, and everything has to start with story first, story over visuals. I say that, but then I am very visual. That's a good question. Thanks for the question.
All right, Elmi's got a question.
So I'm chronically ill, and I know there's several other people in the social club who also are. And I think you even said that you wrote the story about the Munchausen by proxy thing, and then found a whole bunch of other stories came out around the same time or afterwards. It's the parent who's making it seem like the kid is sick, whereas if I think for a lot of people the reality is that the children or the somebody is actually sick, but the story that's told is that they're faking, or that somebody else is making it up. I spent a long time not being believed that I was sick, and I know that a lot of people, especially women and non-binary people, and I guess probably people of color as well, will have difficulty being believed. Like even with Sid's character saying like the police didn't believe him.
No, I'm sorry to hear. I mean, it's always hard when you're kind of trying to represent illness on screen, that you're not, you know, pushing certain narratives and kind of negating the real experiences of people. You know, but I think that's just the nature, you know. I think in this situation, like you said, like, I guess on the one hand, like the fact the father's saying this and no one believes that this would be possible, in the same way that I mean, I feel like it's hard. I think it is harder to believe. I mean, I feel, you know, I'm sorry that people haven't believed you in the past, because I feel like that's definitely not a story I've seen before, where a child saying, you know, like that they're ill and no one believes them. That's certainly not something that I have come across that often. So, you know, that story needs to be told. You know, I don't know if you know, I don't know if you're a storyteller yourself, but, you know,
I am, and it's still like too close and too raw for me. So I've been writing for 10 years or something, and I've never gone close to that. It's like, it's too hard for me.
You know, the most personal, when you're ready, like the most personal stories are certainly the most powerful, I've learned. You know, so
thank you.
I hope you get to tell your story. You know, I think every perspective is valid and worth you know, sharing with the world. So, you know, I'll look out for it.
Okay, Chantel.
So you said that Sid gave you a lot to work with. So I imagine there were a few different ways the story could have gone and different takes. Were you like tempted to, did you have a hard time deciding which version of editing to use and which take to use? And do you have any comment on that?
No, I think it was Sid, to be honest. Like, I could just, like, you know, when you're doing a short, at the end of the day, like, you don't have that many takes, if I'm being honest. You know, our shooting ratio was tight. I mean, I'd be lucky if I had like 3 takes for every shot, which is not, you know, I mean, it's not ideal. But, you know, every performance was pretty like on point, really. I think the only one that I think I kind of kept swapping over was when he turned, the look he gives to his daughter in the car, when he's like, but when he says out you get, that one, I definitely feel like I had another one that I layered on top of. I kept swapping between the two because I was like, which one do I go for? And like one, you know, one I played off eye line, one I played in like a little bit closer to the eye line, so as if it was to the audience. So yeah, there was like a couple, and then some I played a little harder, some played a little softer. It's like, oh, how far do we go? So those were the decisions, but it was always, at the end of the day, whichever decision we went with was always to try and adhere to that, you know, that narrative of what are his intentions, you know, trying to keep that as ambiguous as possible, and like not trying to be inauthentic with those representations, you know, because it's really easy to be like, oh, we're trying to make him the baddie, so like at least make you think he's the baddie. So we don't want to go too far down the other route. So it was always, that's always where we rooted the decision in with his performances. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, he was great in everything, I mean, he just gave me different things, so I just had enough to choose from. So that was great. Choice, he gave me choice. That's a gift.
Nice, thank you.
All right, thank you all for the excellent questions. Oh, it looks like Rob's ready to ask a question finally. Been sitting here for an hour and a half lurking.
I'm going to ask about from a music perspective, just how much input you have as kind of, you know, the overall creative for the project, and if there's any kind of difference between how it's put together for shorts and more kind of feature length, or whether you just let the composer have at it and completely free reign.
Well, I mean, I usually with music, and with this one was no different. I gave a brief at the start of it, and where I want the music, what I want the music to do emotionally, you know, and I wanted to build in, like, I mean, it's a very subtle thing, but we built in like different thematics for Sid's character and for the mom's character. So when you're with the different characters, there's actually there's something like a specific kind of sound that's attributed to each of those characters. But you know, I'm a control freak, so I'm definitely on top of the music, like everything. That's just what we're directors, that's what we do. So yeah, like I'm quite specific when it comes to, once I kind of give them the brief, and then they have a bit of free reign to kind of, you know, like I like seeing what they're going to come back with just very little direction, and just kind of an emotional, at the end of the day, it's rooted in emotion and energy. So my direction isn't too complex to start, but then once they start feeding me tracks, I'll basically go through them against picture and give them more detailed notes about like, okay, no, this doesn't work here. We need to try and like, peak it here, for example, or we need to kind of like bring in a different sound at this point, or I might specify the instrument if I feel like I need to. So yeah, I mean, it really just depends, but at the end of the day, it's always rooted in the character's, emotional space and what I want the audience to be feeling at that point.
In terms of who you actually work with, do you tend to go with like, a specialist shorts composer, or is it like someone reputation, that kind of thing?
I mean, on Baby Mine, I actually, there was a composer who had harassed me for like a year and sent me something like 200 emails, and he was just so dedicated. I was like, okay, I'll give him a shot. So he did one of my other shorts, but lately I've been kind of mixing it up, working with different composers. But he was great. I mean, he just took direction very well, but I'm trying to kind of like give opportunities to more like women and people of color. So I've kind of been trying to prioritize like, that going that direction for as much as you can. But yeah.
Good question, Rob. Wow. So we've covered quite a broad swath of topics here. Nour, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. As somebody said earlier, it's just such a treat to get to talk to a filmmaker and just really dig in and learn from you. So thank you so much.
It's nice to see all the comments as well, actually.
Yeah. Rose, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for all the great comments and questions. And I wanted to say also thank you specifically for in film music trying to recognize women and people of color, because the composing world has a huge problem with that. But I had a writing question. I was curious, since you said you often know the endings before you start, do you write like linearly when you write your scripts, or do you like write in chunks and piece it together?
I mean, I think it just really depends on the story. Everything kind of unfolds a little bit differently, but most of the time I will kind of know where I want to go with the film. So like I have to know the ending, because I got to know where I'm going to go with it. Like, how am I going to get there? I know, okay, I know point A, I know point Z, like what are the bits in between? So then once I've kind of, there's usually like key things that you might put in and be like, okay, these definitely are like the biggest kind of like turning points in your story. So I'll start with the bit, I might kind of fill it in the big kind of reveals of like, what's the kind of like the biggest cliffhangers of the story. And then I'll start crafting the inner beats and kind of like, and go linearly through it. But like sometimes when I write, like I might find like, I generally try and just do what I want to do in the moment, like whatever I feel most excited about writing, I'll generally just start with that. So like once I've got the plot down, when I start actually writing, like I might find that actually, I want to write this scene, and I'll just kind of like go for it, because it's like I'm excited about the scene, I want to write it, and it might not be in linear order, but generally like I will know where I'm like I'll have my structure or everything before I go crazy and go in between. I think it's really yeah, because then at least I'll know. I don't like I never like doing work that might change. Like if I write something and then I'm like, oh, actually this doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't, if I like, so it does help to go linear as much as possible. But having an ending for me sometimes is pretty crucial, so I know where I'm going.
Nour, if you want to stick around and run through the chat while we take care of a couple of other things, and if there's any questions you see in there that you want to answer, we can do that. I don't want to keep you too late.
I mean, I haven't even got to the end yet. It's like,
oh yeah, it just keeps going.
It just keeps going. It's still like, you guys are really, I mean, it's really humbling. I'm liking it, and it's really interesting seeing the conversation about gun culture in the US. I mean, I didn't expect that it would spur that much conversation just from the back of, it's really interesting. No, I mean, I'm really like humbled by how kind of engaged everybody is. I mean, there was a few questions that kind of came up, like someone asked if I use a storyboard for my films. The answer sometimes. I actually have a guy out in in Ohio who does my storyboards. But I kind of find that they're coming, like I really prefer to use them for like heavy VFX sequences or things that have action, versus kind of just standard scripts. I prefer to be a bit more fluid. I find that storyboards can be restrictive sometimes. In the end, it's just a blueprint. It's just you wanted to see it, so it's helpful when it's more engaged, when it's kind of there's more going on, like with an action scene. But yeah, thanks for that question. I'm trying to think what else there's. No, it's really nice. I'm very, it's lovely reading all these. I mean, I didn't expect there'll be such an engaged Sid community as well, you know.
Yes, there's a huge variety of interests and vocations, and so whenever we have a topic, it gets questioned from multiple angles. I'll say it that way. There's a lot to talk about. So
great.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for today then. Thank you everybody for joining us. This was fantastic. Nour, thank you so much.
Oh, that's your pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It was fascinating. And we appreciate your insights and your stories, and we'll look for what you're doing next.
Oh, thank you. I mean, actually, just a few people just asked about sending the storyboard. Sure. I was thinking of, I might just post a link.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks
good
so
luck,
much.
everyone. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Nour. Thank you.
Bye.